If you're a beginner, gather here. Today's video is going to be the easiest video you have seen online on how to sew a simple asymmetric hemline top. This is actually what is trending right now. It's a very simple top and it's sleeveless. So I'll be sewing just the top and I'll be using just 1 yard of fabric. This is crepe. So I'll be drafting this on the pattern paper, but you can draft it on the fabric as well. So this is what I wanted to use directly on the fabric, but the chalk that I have is exactly the same color, and if I use it like that you will not be able to see clearly. So I decided to draft the pattern. So to do this, I'll just first and foremost draw a straight line on the paper, and then from this line I'll be marking my measurement. So I'll first mark my chest line, I'll mark my bust line, and I'll mark my half length. So normally my half length is 16.5, but today I'll be using 16 inches or even 15.5 because this is a dartless top. So I'll go ahead and mark the same thing on the other side of the pattern paper as well. And I'll also mark my hip line. So my hip line is 24 inches. Sorry, it did not show, but it's 24 inches. So now I'll just draw a straight line like this. So after that, the next thing I'm going to do now is to divide my shoulder by 2. So my shoulder is 14, I divide it by 2 is 7. So I'll mark it there and I'll mark it on the chest line as well. So from this point, I will just connect it from 1 inch away from the top line. I'll connect it down to the chest line. And then here I'll mark my neck width and I'll connect it like this. So after that, the next thing to do now is to mark the neck depth. So I'm trying to recreate what we have on the thumbnail. So I'll be using 3 inches and I'll connect it with my front curve like this. Then after that, on the chest line, I'll be dividing my bust measurement by 4. I got 8.5. I'll add half an inch for ease because this is a simple dartless top, and I'll add 1 inch for sewing allowance. Then from here, I will just go up by 1 inch for the back armhole. And then from this point, I'll divide it by 2 like this, and from here I'll go in by half an inch. So all this line that I'm drawing now, I'll just use my front curve and connect from the shoulder all the way to the chest line like this. Then after that, on the waistline, I'll divide my waist by 4 and I'll add 1 inch for sewing allowance. I'm not adding any ease to the waist because I want it to be tight at the waistline. If you want it to be free, you can add half an inch to that point. And then on the hip line, I'll be dividing my hip by 4. It's 9.5 when I divided it, but because we are going to be running it with a gather skirt and there's extra allowance at that point based on what I'm trying to recreate, I marked 12 inches. So in other words, I added extra about 2.5 inches extra to it. Then now I'll just connect it to the chest line. That is the waistline to the chest line, and from this waistline I'll use my front curve and I'll connect it to the hip line like this. So with this, we have that snatch waist effect that you can see on the top. So I'll go ahead and cut, but when I'm cutting, I'm adding half an inch sewing allowance to just the neckline. While for the back armhole here, just pay attention to how I cut it. So I'm cutting it straight and I'll go through that 1 inch point that we marked earlier. Remember, we marked 1 inch point there, and then I'll connect it to the chest line like this. While for the front armhole, I will just cut it out like this, following the initial armhole that we drew earlier. So if you are drafting it on the pattern directly, on the fabric directly, you are cutting the armhole for the back different from that of the front. Okay, so the first one will be for the back and then the second one will be for the front. So now we are going to be creating that asymmetric effect that you can see on the hemline. So in order to do this, I've opened this up and this is what we have. So now I'm going to determine where I want it to start from, either left or right, and then I'll go down by 3 inches and I'll connect it all the way to the other side like this. So I'm going to try my best to curve it as much as possible so that you can have that curve effect that is at the hemline point like this, and I'll just connect it, drawing a curved line. So now I'll go ahead and cut it out. Sorry, that other part was not showing. I didn't know about that. So just go ahead and cut it. You are connecting it directly to the other side and you are cutting it out. And then on this point, this is what we have. So this is what we are going to be using to cut for the front. So exactly what we have here, like if you are drafting it on the pattern paper, exactly what we have here is what you are going to place on the fabric, and you are going to open it up like this and you're going to cut. So you're cutting just one piece when you open it up, and you cut also one piece for the lining. So at this point I've cut on the fabric for the front, and this is what it looks like. So exactly the pattern paper that I had for the front is what I placed on the fabric and I cut, and I've also gone ahead to cut the lining as well. So now I'm going to be placing the lining on the fabric and I'll be joining it at the neckline using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So after cutting, you're going to close it up again, and now I'm going to be cutting the back for this dress. So for the back neckline, I'll just connect from the neck width all the way down to the chest line like this. So if you want it to be really exposed, this will work perfectly well. But one problem about this is that the bra will be showing. That is, my bra strap will be showing at the back, and I don't want this. So I'll just go ahead and increase that point like this and connect it to the neck width. So you can increase it more than I did, because even with this, the bra strap was still showing a little. So just have that at the back of your mind when you are cutting. And remember, the armhole is going to be 1/2 inch outside, unlike that of the front, like I showed you earlier. So by the time you open it up, this is what we have. So if you want to add zip at the side seam, you're going to place this exactly on the fabric and you're going to be cutting. But if you want the zip to be at the back, you're going to be opening it up like this. So by the time you're cutting on the fabric, you're going to cut exactly the same thing on the fabric. The only difference here is that you are going to be adding 1 inch sewing allowance at the zipper line. So at this point, add 1 inch on both sides when you are cutting, but every other thing remains the same. So after that, this is what the back looks like as well. Remember, add 1 inch sewing allowance at the zipper line. So after that, you're going to be joining the lining of the back to the fabric at the neckline. So you're going to sew like this using 1/2 inch sewing allowance on both sides. So after sewing, this is what the front looks like. I use 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So at this point, I'm just going to notch it open. The essence of notching is so that by the time you are turning it to the right side, it can easily open and the round neck will be easily formed. If you don't notch it, it will not open. You will not be able to turn it to the right side, like it will not come out clean. So when you notch it, you turn it to the right side, and now you're going to understitch it. So you are understitching on the lining, not on the main fabric, and you're going to be sewing it very close to the joining point. So this is what we have for the back. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to notch it, but for the back, I'm notching just that triangle point like this. So when you notch it and you open it up, this is what we have. So with this now, by the time we are turning it to the right side, it can easily turn. So you're going to do the same thing. You turn it to the right side and you're going to understitch it on the lining very close to the joining point. So after understitching, this is what we have for the front. As you can see, it's properly formed. That is, if the round neck is properly formed, and this is what we have for the back. And now we are going to be joining the back to the front at the shoulder. So in order to do this, we are going to be joining the main fabric of the back to the main fabric of the front, and then we join the lining of the back to the lining of the front. So we are using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So make sure that both the back and the front align at that midpoint there when you are joining. Okay, so that you'll be able to turn it easily to the right side. So you're going to do the same thing on the other side as well, joining the back to the front at the shoulder. So at this point, I was done joining, and by the time you open it up, I'll turn it to the right side. This is what it looks like. Okay, so now when I open it to the turn it to the wrong side, this is what it looks like. I used 1/2 inch sewing allowance, and what I did was, from the midpoint I sewed to the armhole area, and then for the lining I sewed from the armhole area to the midpoints. That's the only way you can easily sew it. Okay, the next thing we are going to do now is we are going to be turning it to the wrong side like this. So just pay attention to how I am turning it. So when you turn it to the wrong side, this is what it should look like. So now I'm just going to be closing the armhole of the back and the front. So in order to do this, I'll make sure that the shoulder of the lining is aligning, the shoulder of the main fabric is aligning to that of the lining. Okay, so you're going to sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance from the side seam through the shoulder all the way to the other side. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the top as well. I'm going to join the shoulder line all the way to the side seam down, and I will join it also from the shoulder all the way to the side seam for the back. So by the time I'm done sewing, this is what it looks like. I use 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So now I'm just going to be cutting off the excess, especially if you don't want that place to be too heavy or too thick. So after that, I'm just going to notch it open, and I'll do the same thing for the other side as well. I'll notch it open. So with this notching now, we can easily turn it to the right side and everything will be well relaxed. So after this, I'm going to be turning it to the right side. So I'm going to be passing it through the hole that is left after we are done joining. So this place is a little bit tight, so just take your time and pass it through. So after that, you are going, this is what it looks like. So make sure at this point you give it a very good press. And now I'm just going to be joining the hemline of the front to that of the lining. So I'm going to place the back inside, and I'll turn it to the wrong side, and I'll sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So after that, I will notch it open, and I'll turn it to the right side, and I would understitch it at that point so that it will be clean and relaxed. Or you can use a hemming gum. And then for the back, I'm going to do the same thing. I'll turn it to the wrong side, but I'm going to be placing the other piece of the fabric through the side seam like this, and I will join it to the lining using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. I will also close the zipper point as well using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So by the time you're done, this is what it looks like. I've closed the hemline for the back and that of the front. Now I will be joining the zip at the back. Okay, the way you join your zip is the same way you're going to be joining, and you are going to be using an open-ended zip. So after that, you turn it to the wrong side, and we are going to be joining the side seam of the back to the side seam of the front. So at this point, you'll be taking your body measurements. Make sure you take your exact body measurements and you sew it with the allowance that is left. When you're done, that will be all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.